Hello, everybody. Happy here, wishing you all a happy Halloween. Now, tonight, I thought I would do something a little different and just sit here and talk to you about some personal and family stories about things that go bump in the night. Now, some of these will be humorous, some might be a little on the disturbing side or on the spooky side. Um, some of them might even make you stop and think. There's a couple here that make me stop and think pretty regularly. Um, none of this is scripted. I want this to be both informal and authentic, which means sitting here and talking to you guys directly, not reading a pre-planned script. So if I stop or if I getting old enough that I sometimes have to stop and think, what's the name? What's the name? I apologize in advance. Hopefully there won't be a lot of that. But there is one story I will not be telling because of its nature. It's a very disturbing one. It's one that is one of my more compelling ones because there were multiple witnesses of various backgrounds, ages, and so on. However, because of its nature, it could be painful to some people who are still alive and might be watching this. So I'm leaving that one out. But otherwise, I'm just gonna, shed all the skeletons in our family closet, or at least mostly in mine, but um, a few stories, most of them featuring my mother, who seemed to have had a lot of weird stuff happen to her too. Anyway, let's get started. I'm going to start way back in the past. Now, this is a story that's been handed to me by my parents, and I've heard it from other people, and none of the stories, even from the same people over the years, were ever quite the same. Um, the general gist of it is the same, but the details vary from person to person from time to time. So, with that said, in case you're a family member that's heard some variation of this story and it doesn't jive with what you heard, it doesn't jive with everything I've heard. It's just the one that I remember the most or the best. So, without any further ado, once upon a time, in a rural western Colorado, my parents and a couple of other people, at least mother's uncle, Bob Clark, decided one night to go out at night and visit a remote rural haunted house, or a house that was supposed to be haunted. Now, they weren't going to go in it, but they wanted to drive around and just look at the area. Hopefully, maybe they'll see weird in the windows or in the yard. It was mostly just, one of those things that people back in the day in a small town like what this was at that time did for entertainment. Anyway, they all get in the car, they drive out into this rural area through some farmyards, and in the distance they can see the house that they're looking for. So they slowly start approaching it in the car, and lo and behold, in the distance they see a humanoid shape floating through the air near the house, right through the field, right around the house. And they stop the car and they all just sit there and watch and stare. They're freaked out. They're like, "What is this? What are we seeing?" And I know for a fact my mother's uncle Bob Clark probably wanted to turn around and leave. I know this because of another story I'm going to tell you where, let's just say I know him, I don't trust him. Um, Talked a good talk when it comes to hunting ghosts, but trust me, you don't want him on a ghost hunt. Anyway, um, finally, one or two of them, I'm assuming my father was probably one and probably the instigator, decided that we need to get a closer look. Um, Mostly because my father was not the type that was going to back away from something like that. So they finally start creeping forward in the car toward this floating humanoid figure. And, it gets brighter as they get closer, but it keeps just kind of, and it finally stops moving around and just kind of, it's like it's standing there looking at them. Keep creeping closer, and finally they realize the truth. What they're looking at is a white shape on a cow that's walking through the field. And because of the dark night, the cow itself was more or less hidden by the darkness, but the white pattern on its coat, or hide, I guess you would say, stood out, and it just happened to be silhouetted in a vaguely human shape. So that was my introduction to family ghost stories, and it's kind of a silly one. My mother used to love to tell it, and occasionally my dad would bring it up too, but not as often. Um, but I love those stories, and since that time, I've heard others, and I've experienced a few things, and that's where we're going to go next. So, growing up, I lived in a house over in the north end of town that was on top of a high hill surrounded by cherry orchards. And I loved that house. I did. But I hated the basement. I hated it. I loathed it. And might say, well, that's normal for children. A lot of them are afraid of the dark, and basements are dark. And normally I would agree with you. However, I didn't have any trouble with my cousin's basement. I didn't have any trouble with any other basements that I can think of. When we moved to a new house, I didn't have any troubles whatsoever with that basement. But the basement of this house, for whatever reason, the entire time I lived there, and even after when I go back and visit, I hated going down in the basement, especially at night, and definitely when the lights were out. In fact, I used to run down the stairs to turn on the lights. When I'd go back up, I'd turn them off and run up the stairs. That basement terrified me. But I never really had a tangible reason other than something down there always made me feel off, um, scared. Just I was just never comfortable down there. Now, when I got a little older, in middle school years, I got my first computer, a TRS-80 Model 3, if I recall. The first one I had was the 3. My father gave me his downstairs office for my computer, which meant if I wanted to use the computer, I had to spend a lot of days down, a lot of my time down in the basement, and not only in the basement, but in what was intended to be a fallout shelter, meaning there were no windows in that room. It was designed to be a good place to seal off in case of a nuclear attack. In fact, I can distinctly remember my parents, both of them, actually explaining the process of what we would do if there was a nuclear attack. We'd get in that room, we'd shut the door, there was a bookshelf in there full of books. We would use the books to blockade up the door to help keep radiation out, that kind of thing. But this room was isolated. It was in the far corner of the basement, near the furnace, so there was always noise. And there were no windows. It was away from most of the lights. So other than the single light in the room, it was dark, and outside of it was dark. So it was not a comfortable place for me. I hated it. But I wanted that computer. I wanted to learn how to use it, so I went. Now, for the most part, nothing ever really happened other than I did be in that room. However, there was one exception. One night I was down there, and I was working late at night, and around 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm sure it was right around 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm sitting there typing, and I just happened to get this sensation I was being watched. And it was almost overwhelming, and at first I tried to ignore it, but it's like somebody's just, I'm not alone. Finally, I kind of look over my shoulder to the hallway, and I see a dark silhouette of a man standing there. He kind of looks like he's kind of leaning up against the doorway. I immediately just kind of subconsciously assumed it was my father. So I'm like, go back to my typing. It's like, doesn't say anything. So I'm like, need something? And I glance over, and whoever it is still there. But they've moved. They're in a different position now. No lighting has changed, nothing else. The computer was not facing in any way where it would have been shining light, and even then, trust me, a TRS-80 Not like you've got a lot of movement. It's just literally typing out something to program. The shadow was still a humanoid shape, but it was now directly in the center of the doorway. And again, I was not really too alarmed. I felt uncomfortable, absolutely uncomfortable, but I wasn't alarmed because I still was assuming it was my father. So I go back typing just for a second, and I'm like, um, um, you need something again. It's just like, what's going on? I look over again, and I see the shadow move out into the away towards the main area and where the stairs would be. And I'm like, that was weird. He never comes down here at this hour, and if he did, he would have said something. But maybe it was just somebody playing a prank on me or whatever. But I decided to get up. I went out in the hall, looked around, nobody there. Didn't hear anybody going up the steps, which is also weird because even with my deaf ears, I've had hearing loss all my life. You could usually tell when somebody's coming up and down the stairs. At least I could. And weird. So I went upstairs. I went to the bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I look in and they're both in bed. My brother's in bed. There's nobody else in the house. The doors are locked. So I'm thinking, maybe it was my dad. He came down, checked on me, kind of got up real fast, quietly, and got back in bed and messing with me. But it was just a very weird, unsettling experience. And it might have ended at that as just me thinking, oh, it's either him or my imagination going wild, except for one other thing. About 3 or 4 days later, it wasn't long, it was less than a week later, my mother's driving me somewhere. I don't remember where we were going, doesn't matter. And we get there, before we get out of the car, she just doesn't get out right away. She's like, you spend a lot of the time in the basement, right? And I'm like, yeah. She said, do you ever see anything weird down there? And I said, not normally, but recently I saw something kind of weird. And she said, was it like a floating light moving through the area? And I'm like, wait, what? She said, I was down there last night in the sewing room at night, and this white glowing mist was floating through the area across the front of my sewing room towards your computer room and then back again, and then it just faded away. Now that would be almost exactly the same area I saw this shadow figure. She was freaked, and I'm like, I never saw anything like that, but there was this, I saw this shadow there that I thought was my father. I saw it leaning in the doorway, I saw it standing in the center of the doorway and walk towards your sewing room. So within the space of 3 or 4 days, both of us saw something totally different, but in the same area. Now, I have no idea what it was we saw, but I've never forgotten that, and I've never forgotten how I was specifically afraid of that basement and no other, which makes me wonder if there wasn't something going on there, but I have no idea what it would be. But I thought I'd share that because that's my personal first experience with anything of that nature. Now, let's go back to my mother's Uncle Bob Clark, because my second experience was both humorous and, at least for a while, just like the first story, very disturbing until we realized the truth. Then it became even maybe more disturbing, but I'll get to that in just a second. Now, my great grandfather, John Clark, had a reputation, to say the least. If this family had a skeleton in our closet, it's John Clark. He was quite the character. He was a scrapper. He was a con artist. He was constantly in trouble for one thing or the other. But family, so what do you do? Um, I vaguely remember him, but he died shortly after I was born, so I don't remember him much. Um, except to say that he had uh, quite the reputation in the family, quite the reputation. So one Halloween, my mother and uh, her uncle Bob Clark, who would have been John's son, got this brilliant idea. They had been watching some show that had talked about recording, placing a tape recorder on tombstones or on, near gravestones in cemeteries and catching the voice of the dead. And they decided they wanted to try that on Halloween with John Clark's grave because they reasoned if anybody was cantankerous enough and mean enough to come back on Halloween night and haunt anything, it'd be him. Um, so they convinced me to go along with them and actually place the tape recorder on John's grave. And like an idiot, I agreed. Um, and why wouldn't I? I thought it was a fascinating idea. I would never have chosen John's grave, and I'm going to be perfectly honest here. I am horribly terrified of cemeteries. It's my one true overpowering fear. I think most people think I'm kidding about that, but I'm not. Um, I do not like cemeteries. Um, there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it is from stories I've heard that I'm going to blame my grandfather for part of it because, and one of my teachers. I want to say it was Mrs. Adams, but I can't be 100% sure. Definitely a female teacher, and it was either Mrs. Adams or somebody right before her. Um, anyway, doesn't matter who it was. But they had told us a story about visiting a cemetery where, while walking through it, a grave partially collapsed under them. My grandfather took me to a cemetery out in the middle of Utah that was very old, very, very old. He wanted to get some pictures of it. I remember walking through it and seeing all these sunken graves. I remember walking over one and feeling the dirt shift underneath me a little bit. And from that moment on, I was terrified of cemeteries. I remain so to this day. I go to them when I have to, but I hate it. I'm terrified. I'm petrified. I kind of tend to freeze up. And there's more to it than just, that experience with the whole mental image of falling into a grave and seeing all those, sunken graves and stuff. As a child, there's more to it. I've got a powerful imagination, and if I make the mistake of reading a tombstone, I tend to imagine that person. And I tend to see them there in the ground. I visualize it, and it just, ugh, I can't do it. So, anyway, they somehow talked me into going on this with them anyway. And we get into the car, my mother, myself, and Bob Clark. They drive me out to the cemetery, and they park as close as they can get to my great-grandfather's grave. They hand me a tape recorder. They asked me to go put it on the grave and make sure it's recording. And then we would drive off and we'd come back in the morning, pick it up, if it's still there and nobody's stolen it. And we would listen and see if we caught any spirits down. Okay. So far, great plan, right? Except it goes wrong almost immediately. I get out, I go over to the grave, push play, I set it down, and being mortally afraid of cemeteries, and at night on Halloween, I lose my cool. I freak out, I put the tape recorder down, turn, and run back to the car. I've had enough. Already, I'm done. I'm out of here. They see me running at the car, and they take off without me. Now, the windows were open, and I literally dive in headfirst through the window on the back seat. And they're driving to the cemetery with me half in, half out, until they get far enough away that they finally let me in the right way. So, that's the first half of the story. It gets even more interesting. And yes, I still remember that day. I still remember that, I should say, night. I still want to murder both of them. I can't now, but there's not a Halloween that goes by that I don't want to grab both of them and strangle them for putting me in that situation and leaving without me, or trying to leave without me. But the rest of the story. So we pick up the tape recorder. Miracle of miracles, it's still there. We take it home, we put it in the tape recorder, and we're listening. And at first, there's nothing that you wouldn't expect. I think you can hear me running away. You definitely hear the car peeling out. Nothing, 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 nothing. We're just about to give up when we hear a voice. And it's definitely a voice, no question about it. Um, Very low, very masculine. We're straining, we turn it up as high as we can. We're straining to hear what they're saying. And at first we can't. And then we're like looking at each other. It's like, we actually get something? We got something. This isn't random noise. This is definitely a voice talking. But it's not clear what it's saying. It's like my normal hearing without my hearing aid. If I don't see the person I'm talking to, I just hear, Charlie Brown voices. It was kind of like that, but it was definitely voices. But the key word here is, just as we're about to give up, we realize something. It is voices, not a voice. There's more than one person talking. Two men from the sound of it. We're like, talking to the grave right next to him or something? No. We keep listening. It stops for a while and it starts up again, same two voices. We hear just enough to know that we're hearing a drug deal going down. So that is part 2 of the story. We didn't manage to capture a ghost unless my great grandfather was a drug dealer on the side. We managed to catch some guy selling some other guy some drugs in the cemetery late at night on Halloween. Which is, yeah, there's that. We actually, my mother and my uncle, or her uncle, discussed, taking the tape to the police. And we immediately decided that was a terrible idea because how exactly do we explain how we got that tape? Um, but I'll never forget that experience. Probably one of the scarier experiences of my life because when I saw them taking off, I thought they saw something behind. You know how this goes. I scared them, they scared me. It was not fun. And then listening to that tape, realizing their voices, that was terrifying until we realized what we got, and it wasn't much better when we figured out what we did actually have. So that's my next story. Now we're gonna fast forward it. Well, yeah, we're gonna fast forward. It's about the same period of time, maybe a little later. I'm working at this time. I'm working as overnight maintenance at a restaurant. Now, there's actually two of us on overnights. Normally, I would work the weekend, Saturday, Sunday. The other guy was full time weekdays. However, one day a week, Friday nights, um, I would go in for an extra day to help wax the floors because that was a pretty labor intensive job. We'd have to move all the tables off, all the furniture off, um, sweep, mop, put a wax coat on by hand, and we'd have to put a second coat on after it dried a bit, and then kind of buff it with a dry mop. So it was pretty labor intensive. We didn't have any fancy machines or anything. It was all by hand. And working at night, I'm going to say this much. If there was ever a place I've ever been that I would say was haunted, it was that restaurant. Because at night, when I was there by myself, um, in this back hall, there was this back hallway there that went from the dining area past a, what do you want to call it, a banquet room to the manager's office and then over to the restroom. And this hallway, late at night, one or two times a night, something weird would happen. At least would if I was in the area. You'd hear footsteps down there, which could have been anything. Could have been, air conditioners or furnaces or whatever. But they really sound like footsteps. They always sound like they're coming from that hall. Never heard them anywhere else. But more importantly, the restaurant had those swinging doors that are weighted to the day or designed so that they shut automatically. And I worked there a lot, 4 days a week, usually sometimes 5. At that time, both day and night shifts. And those doors didn't normally move for any reason. It wasn't air conditioner coming on, furnace coming on. They didn't move. Maybe just a little flutter, but that's it. However, late at night, generally say between 1 and 3 in that zone, a lot of maybe once or twice a month, I would see the doors flap completely open and shut for no reason. Now, again, in that the same area, I'd hear the footsteps. I would also occasionally think I saw something moving down the hall out of the corner of my eye, but I never actually saw anything in the hall. Mostly it was doors moving. Sometimes I'd hear the manager's door down at the end rattle like somebody was trying to get in or out. Those swinging doors, I mean, it wasn't just a little flutter like a wind or something. It was all the way open, all the way closed. And so I talked to the other overnight guy. I asked him, did anything weird ever happen to you at night? Like, yeah, that back hall. There's something going on in that back hall. Doors open, footsteps, same thing that I was seeing and hearing. So on one of the Friday nights when we were both working together, however, it got really weird. We were getting ready to wax the floor, so we had to take everything off the floors. And right at the end of that hall, we had an ice cream machine with a toppings table. And we had moved the toppings table. We were going to move the toppings table out of there onto the carpet so we could sweep a mop under it. Well, the back of the toppings display had a full mirror like a lot of these things do. Make it look like you got a lot more food than you really do, or a lot more toppings in this case. So he's on one side, I'm on the other. We're both looking forward, or we're lifting it and moving it, but we're looking in the mirror. And both of us drop the table at the same time, and we both panic and turn around because we both saw somebody standing behind us in between us, almost exactly like you would see like at Disneyland in the Haunted Mansion when the hitchhikers jump in. That's what we saw. Directly behind us, there was a third person. Right behind us, it was very translucent, wasn't glowing or anything. It was kind of shadowy, but you could see just the shape of a human there. You could see the facial features. We both agreed it was Asian in appearance, and it looked like it was screaming. We both saw this same time. We both saw the same thing. And to this day, I don't have an explanation for it. I do know that right through that area, an old train track used to go. So my only working hypothesis is a somebody laying the rail lines may have died and gotten buried alongside the track. That did happen back in the day. And he's still wandering up and down that rail line. But that's my only idea. But that we definitely both saw that. Now, later I became manager of that place, and we had many more maintenance men come in and out that worked the overnight shift. And I've asked a few of them, have you seen anything weird at night? With only one exception, all of them saw and heard weird things in that hallway. So there's something going on there. If there's any ghost story I personally experienced where I genuinely believe that there was something weird going on, it's there. But that's the story. Take it as you will, believe or don't. But I believe. I don't know what I saw. I don't know what it was, but something weird was going on in that hall, and I will always believe that. Okay, moving right along. This one is going to feature my mother alone. This isn't really a ghost story, but it is a fun story of something very bizarre. She was at the last house we all shared together. We hadn't been there. Well, we'd been there, I don't know, a while. And she was alone one day, and this little glowing blue ball of light floated through a wall across the across the dining kitchen. It's a dining room. We actually ate in there mostly, but it was actually the kitchen. The dining room was a separate room, and went out and out through the other wall and out into the yard. You saw it float up the street and disappear. Now, this isn't a ghost story. This is almost certainly an encounter with ball lightning, which is it is known, or at least there are plenty of stories told by people who have seen ball lightning, that it can go through walls, windows, without leaving a mark or with leaving minimal signs of its passing. And they're usually described as glowing, floating balls of blue or whitish light. I'm pretty sure that's probably what she saw, but those sightings are extremely rare. I don't doubt that she saw something. My mother could have flights of fancy sometimes, but nothing like that. I have no doubt she saw something, and it was probably ball lightning. But still, that is a creepy thing to see. If I saw something like that floating through my living room, I'd be freaking out. So, that's a fun story. Short but simple but fun. Now, let's get into. Now, this is probably my weirder ghost stories because it's not really a ghost story, but at the same time, it is. It's really hard to explain. Back when I was in middle school, very early in middle school, if I remember right, my mother was gravely ill, as in she should have died. She was a victim of encephalitis, which is brain swelling if you're not aware. Her brain swelled so much that it was crushing itself against her skull. The local hospital couldn't do anything for her, so they had to airlift her over to Denver. And she was in bad, bad shape. And even though they did save her, for a long time, memory was completely scrambled. Things that happened yesterday, she would swear was years ago. Things that happened years ago, she would swear was yesterday. It got better over time, but especially in the early days, it was horrible. Her personality changed dramatically. There were hints uh, of the old mother that I knew, but there was also a very new one as well that was kind of emerging. The encephalitis did that to her, and it was a terrible, painful thing. She would, like I said, her memories especially were really messed up. And where I'm going with this is that years later, we moved to the new house from the old one, and my mother's behavior was starting to get more erratic again. She'd been getting a little better, but something was going on. But she was getting more erratic again. Now, there could be a lot of explanations, um, some of them pretty obvious, like menopause, for example, or just getting older. But she was getting more unstable. She was doing things that were very, um, not even her new personality. And I know my dad was disturbed. I really don't know how my brother felt about it or if he noticed or not. But I noticed, I know my dad noticed. Something was, he was getting strange again, just like he had been early in encephalitis. And she was doing some really weird stuff. Not all the time by any means, but when she did something strange, it was way strange and very concerning. Um, but what really got me was both my father and I, at one point when this was right at its almost like its maximum intensity, we both started having weird experience. Um, there was a time when I heard my mother talking to me from the hallway with her voice. I heard her talking. It was clear as day. She wasn't there. And she sounded kind of panicked. When I heard her, I was actually concerned. It sounded like she was. I couldn't understand what she was saying, but it sounded urgent. It was kind of a, I need something, please help me type thing. Within, right around that exact same period, My father's out on a railroad train, and he hears my mother calling for help. And this went on for a couple of weeks where both of us were having these weird experiences with my mother while she wasn't there. And I'm not really sure what that was either. I don't know how long it went on for my dad. For me, it was about a 3 week period. And it's, from the stories he told me, it sounds like he just had a couple, 2 or 3 experiences. They were all very similar, where he was hearing her voice, she sounded panicked, or she was saying things like, help me, help me. Usually when he's very far away, like I said, on the railroad, going from here to Salt Lake, which is, a long ways away. So I don't know what that was. Part of me thinks that a part of her was trying to get help, but it just, I don't know. New personality was there. Sometimes I think it may be the old mother was trying to get help. I don't know, but I do know something weird was going on during that period. And it climaxed with an event I don't want to talk about. Um, I don't think very many people now know about it, but it's deeply personal to the family, so I'm not going to go into that event. But after that, things settled down, sort of returned to normal for a while, and then it got better. But for a while, it was a very touchy, so to speak. Anyway, that's another story. Now, let me think. What else have I got to share? Okay, this one, now we're going to get into my grandmother. I'm living in her house now, and in her later years, she started to develop Alzheimer's. This is kind of related to what I was talking about with my mother. Um, she started to develop Alzheimer's. At first, it wasn't too bad, but it started to get worse and worse, as Alzheimer's does. At the time that it really started getting concerning, I had moved briefly to Ohio. And while I was there, um, one night I was driving home. And I was still new to the area, and I was still kind of exploring a little. And I was going home, but I tried to take a different road that went through actually a neighborhood, well, not a neighborhood, but an area where some Amish people lived. So it was very dark, and it just had this feeling because it was so different. Just the way things looked. There was a wagon in the yard, the whole 9 yards. It was cool. Nothing disturbing about it. It was just different. And I was driving, went through that area, came around a corner into a wooded area. And I'm driving down, and off to my left, as I go by, a huge black dog emerges from the woods, right, not in front of me, but to the front and to the side. I'm going, not going really fast because it is a wooded area, um, and because I was still kind of doing the looking around thing. It was dark, it was night, but I was new to the area, and I was kind of enjoying the feeling of being in an area that felt like I was back in the past because I just passed this Amish farm, and so I had this vibe going on, and this huge dog just coming out to the side of the road disturbed me for 2 reasons. First, because I had something, I was like, whoa, I was afraid I might hit it. I went past it too far to the side. But as I went past it, a little way past it, I slowed down and I stopped because something wasn't right. I was sure it was a big dog, but there was a mailbox there, and the dog was way taller than the mailbox. That couldn't be right. So I look back, I don't see anything, so I turn around and I go back. There is a mailbox, and it's about the average mailbox height, about, hand height, which would have made the dog probably as tall as I am on all fours, which is not, no, 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 no. But I don't see anything. But maybe it was a horse or a pony from that farm? But no, I was sure it was a dog. It, it was, no question in my mind, a dog. Look around, I don't see any sign of it. So I turn back around again, keep going, and lo and behold, I pass it again. Just out of the corner of my eye, see it again. I stop, turn around, I get home. I'm kind of freaked out by this because I've never seen anything like that. It wasn't like I've had things, they say you recognize shapes. I've had that. I recognize it for what it is most of the time. But in this particular case, those two sightings, the second one may have been that. But the first one, there's zero doubt in my mind. I saw a dog, a big, large, black dog. It was far enough away that at first the scale kind of threw me off. Once I went back and looked at that mailbox, and I know that thing's head was way above that, the mailbox was up to here to me. I'm like, okay, what in the heck did I just see? So I go home, go to bed. I get woken up in the morning by a phone call with my brother. He tells me that my grandmother is getting bad enough that he needs help with her. So I decided to move back here. Now, the reason I bring that up is because I'm a big fan of folklore and mythology. There's a part of me that thinks I just imagined the whole thing, or I just saw like a horse or a pony anyway, or maybe even a bear. But no, I'm sure it was a dog. But let's just assume if it if I actually did see something and it was a dog, then I can't help but wonder if I didn't see something like the Barghest or something of that ilk, the black dog of legend, the one that heralds tragedy in the family. Certainly doesn't help that the next day I got bad news that made me move back here. So take that however you will, but never seen anything like it before or since. But I will never forget that because that there's no zero doubt in my mind that I saw this big black dog. And like I said, at first it just scared me because I thought it was kind of moving towards the road. Thought it was going to run in front of me and I might hit it. But when I realized what I had seen and gone back and looked and realized how tall it had to have been, that's when it became disturbing. Anyway, we're going to continue with my grandmother here. So I moved back here to town, and I move in with my grandmother. The family decides that I will stay with her as a full-time caretaker because she needs it. She's prone to wandering out. We're in a very rural area here. We're canyon, wild animals, and she's quite prone to wandering off, where she could get hurt easily. In fact, that my first couple of weeks here, she did it twice. I had to start getting creative in ways to make sure she didn't get out when I was sleeping or whatever. And she kept getting worse and worse progressively. Beginning it wasn't bad, but it got pretty bad towards the end. And she started going into these periods where she wasn't really here. She was physically here, but mentally she was gone. She couldn't remember anything, couldn't remember who I was, who she was, where she was half the time. And sometimes she would time slip. For example, there were times that she was sure I was my father, and that we were back in like around the time my parents married. She would talk to me and react to me like that. At one time, she thought I was one of my mother's boyfriends, and she was trying to get me out of here before my father got home and caught me with my mother, which was awkward. But that kind of thing. Now, what this got to do with Halloween and things that go bump in the night? A couple things. Uh, Now, she at one point decided she was no longer going to sleep in her bed. She started sleeping out here in the living room on a couch. Now, I kept trying to get her back to bed. She's like, no, this is more comfortable for me. It's better for my back. When she was lucid, anyway, she would say that. When she wasn't lucid, when she was in one of her zones, she would just get angry with me. Dangerously so at times. In fact, a couple times she actually tried to attack me in the dangerous. So, going with I talked to my brother about it, and he decides this isn't acceptable. She needs something better than a sofa to sleep on. So he rents us a medical bed. One we can put out here in the living room if that's where she wants to be. One of those adjustable hospital beds. We figure that'll be good for her back. I mean, it's a great idea. Um, we get it for her, and she still sleeps on the sofa. He wants nothing to do with that bed. I keep like, come on, Waylon got this for you so you can be more comfortable and be in a proper bed. Give it a try. At least try it. No, come on, try it just once. No. So that goes on for a few days. I'm like, okay. And she's in one of her more lucid states, not quite fully back, but enough so we can actually have a little bit of a conversation. I'm like, okay, will you get in this bed, please? Just try it one night. No. Can you at least tell me why you don't want to lay in this bed? Because somebody died in it. And that made me stop. Like, it is a rental hospital bed that is actually, quite within the realm of possibility, I guess. I'm like, okay, what makes you think that? Because sometimes when I'm laying here at night, I can see him. That stopped the conversation right away. I never pushed her to sleep in the bed again, and I didn't want to be anywhere near it at that point. And we did remove it because she wasn't using it not long after that. But I'll never forget the way she said that. It was so deadpan and so disturbing. The way it was just like if you've seen The Sixth Sense when Haley Joel Osment looks at Jaime decides to confess to what's his name, Bruce Willis. Sorry, that he sees dead people and he looks at him and says, "I see dead people." It felt just like that. It was just like that, and it pretty much scared the hell out of me because she was looking at the bed and she said it, and just the way she said it, oh, that was that freaked me out. Now, good chance it was the Alzheimer's speaking, but not 100% chance. I mean, it just freaked me out, and it's just thinking about it now freaks me. Not necessarily because of what she said, but how she said it and the way she looked when she said it. I'm convinced. I'm convinced she saw a dead person there. Now, whether it was a ghost or a manifestation of her Alzheimer's, I'll never know. But it was freaky either way. But I'm gonna tell you one more story that's kind of related to this one in a way. Um, I discovered something in the later stages about my grandmother's Alzheimer's. If I played old time music that I knew she liked and I knew she was familiar with, songs that I've heard her listen to or she played or sang for me, I sat on the keyboard and played those for her. A lot of the times it would actually not only get a positive reaction out of her, but bring her back for a while. So anytime her Alzheimer's got really bad, like when she started getting angry and violent bad, I would sometimes get my keyboard out and start playing songs I knew she liked, and pretty soon she'd come around and start talking like the old days, like not like she was normal again or close to it, as normal as she could anyway. So I did that a lot. There was one time I was doing it. She was sitting in her chair over here looking out the window, and she was faced out, uh, not really here. I don't know where she was, but she wasn't here. I decided, you know what? I'm gonna play some of her favorite music, see if maybe I can get her up and reacting a little. So I started playing some of her favorite songs. I'm playing along, and I started getting this cold chill. It just instantly starts getting really cold. But I'm thinking, well, it can happen. But and then I swear I see movement in the corner of my eyes. I look over, there's nothing. Still playing. I look at my grandmother, and she's starting to react a little. I can see her kind of starting to move around and get a little into something. Okay, it's working, but it's getting colder, and I keep seeing motion in the corner of my eye more and more. Like, what's going on? Whatever. Keep playing. And my grandmother starts talking. and she's talking to people. And when I turn around, I swear, for just a moment, there were people around her, and she was talking directly to them. It was just a brief moment, but for a second, I felt like I was in her head, seeing what she was seeing. That's the best way I can describe it. Because I could see her, I mean, I wasn't in her physical place, but whatever she was seeing and talking to, I was seeing too. There were like 3 or 4 people there for just a fraction of a second and they faded away. He was still talking to him, but I didn't see him anymore. But for a second I did. And then the cold went away. And then she started blinking and she comes around and she's here. And everything's back to normal. Not gonna that probably that's another one of those experiences that really sticks with me because I don't know what that was. I really don't. It reminds me a little bit of when my mother was calling for help, but it's different. And it was there's a part of me now that wonders maybe Alzheimer isn't what we think it is. Maybe sometimes they really are seeing things, not thinking they're seeing things, they're actually seeing things that are actually there somehow. I don't know if that's the case, but it's hard for me not to think that at times. You know, I went to school for 3.5 years to be a scientist. Now I got a degree in history. I should be beyond thinking like this, but in the deep, dark still of the night, I still find myself questioning because of things like this. I know what I saw, and sure, it could have been my imagination, but it just fit in so well. It's such a smooth integration, and the pattern, the build up, the getting cold, the sense of movement, the sense of something wrong, something coming, something growing, and then turning and hearing my grandmother talking to people, and turning and just for a second was I don't even know how to describe it. Um, anyway, another story. Trying to think. Anything else I want to share? Anything more recent? No, I think that's about it. Like I said, there is one more that I know that many people saw. I think at least 4 that I can think of, maybe 5, saw as it happened, and I was taken to the side afterwards to kind of see if it would happen again and why we didn't see the same thing. There was still some strange stuff there. Not a lot, but nothing like what the original people involved saw. All I'll say is my mother and some of her family were involved, as well as a family, a friend or two. And it was, if what they saw was what they saw, it was very disturbing. But I don't want to get into it because it's one of those things that could be painful to people that are still around. So, oh, I know one more. This is just, um, it's not so much a ghost story, but a story of a ghost hunting expedition. I used to work with the Museum of Western Colorado, and Dinosaur Valley. I worked mainly at Dinosaur Valley doing auto prep, that kind of thing. But I'd also occasionally end up in the main museum helping with some exhibits or this project, that kind of thing. And at that time, on Halloween, the staff and the volunteers would actually go to various places and on Halloween, late at night, close to midnight, and look for ghosts. They would go to places that were supposedly haunted and they do like a ghost hunting session. And we'd always, at midnight on Halloween, do a seance to try to contact Houdini because, that's a tradition. But we also would go to places that were allegedly haunted. I mean, the museum has plenty of stories of those. And one of them was actually the main museum building. Used to be Grand Junction High School way back in the day. And a teacher did die there. and her ghost is supposed to still wander the halls. And several of the staff members that worked late at night reported experiences. I never had anything there. Another one we went to was actually in the Dinosaur Valley Museum, which was down on Main Street. It used to be I think it was a J.C. Penney's or a Sears at one point, but before that, it was a hotel and casino. Um, and the upper floors were the rooms, and there was basically there was a shooting in one of those rooms. In fact, you can still see where they covered the bullet holes in that room. We actually went in there and looked at it. The area was condemned at the time. You weren't really supposed to be up there, at least not letting the public up there. But Halloween, we went up there. We went to the room where the shooting was, and we decided to set up for the night. We tried to contact the ghost of the guy that was killed there, and then we would at midnight try to contact Houdini. And that one was interesting. I'm not going to say anything happened, but we had a lot of assholes with us on that particular expedition. So they did turn out the lights, and there were a lot of weird sounds and bumps. I have no doubt whatsoever that it was people pranking each other. But we had a lot of fun. And but the main thing I like to share this story for is just simply because of the local history. It's kind of interesting knowing things like this building, which is a museum now. Previously, it was a department store, and before that, it was actually a hotel where they had illegal gambling going on. Not sure what period that was, they said, but that was so long ago I don't remember. I want to say it was during Prohibition, but I could be way off base there. But the shooting upstairs apparently was not necessarily a gangland shooting, but it was gangland style. I mean, it wasn't just it was somebody went in there and really shot up the place. There were a lot of bullet holes in that wall. But it's kind of interesting getting some of those stories. Anyway, I think I've shared enough. I hope you enjoyed at least some of these stories. I hope I didn't upset anybody by sharing a story or family history they didn't want out. Sorry if I did. These are stories my family told, they've shared, and partly I just want to share it because it is Halloween, and I felt like telling some ghost stories, but also because, you know, I don't want the stories forgotten. I'm enough of a historian, and I love folklore enough to know I don't want stories forgotten. So this is one way for me to spread them out, to share them with some family members, some friends, and whoever else happens to be watching. So I hope you enjoyed at least some of those. I hope you don't think I'm totally crazy. I am, generally speaking, a skeptic. I'm an open-minded skeptic. I try to look for rational explanations, but I also try not to just dismiss something because it doesn't fit what we know. I know something weird was going on in that restaurant hall. What it was, I don't know. Maybe it's a perfectly rational explanation. I'm not sure how, especially with that thing we saw standing behind us that two of us saw at the same time. But maybe there is. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I heard my mother calling for help and pleading for something multiple times at the same time my father was having the same experience, all with my mother nowhere near us. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt something weird happened that night I was playing for my grandmother. What it was, I don't know, but something bizarre happened that night. And I do know we got a voice recording when we put that tape recorder on a tombstone or on a gravesite. But I do have a good explanation for that one. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this journey. I hope maybe it cheered up a few people on Halloween. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. If you have any stories you want to share, feel free to post them. If you wish I hadn't told a story and you want me to edit it out before too many people see it, feel free to tell me. I hope I didn't get anything that gets anybody too upset, but, you know, family ghost stories are that way. Skeletons out of the closet. And like I said, I just don't want these stories forgotten. So, happy Halloween again. I'll see you all eventually, someday, somewhere. Bye bye for now.